parents kicked me out for getting pregnant at 19. Years later, I returned to reveal a shocking truth. Please stay with me as I tell my story. And please, do not forget to support our channel by subscribing to our channel, liking our videos, and sharing your loved ones. Your support means the world to us. Now to our story. Poke. The wind cut through Samantha's coat that night, biting her skin as if it wanted to push her back inside. She stood on the porch, backpack straps digging into her shoulders, her breath turning white in the air. Behind her, the door was wide open, letting the warm light spill out into the darkness. But she knew she wasn't welcome there anymore. Her father's voice had been cold and sharp, each word slamming into her like a stone. "You're no daughter of mine." He hadn't shouted. He didn't need to. The way he said it, like she was a stranger who had just insulted him, was worse than yelling. She'd thought her mother would step in, maybe take her side, maybe even just tell her to stay until the morning. Instead, her mother had crossed her arms and stared at the floor. When Samantha tried to meet her eyes, she looked away, as if she couldn't bear to see her own child. Inside, the smell of dinner still lingered: roast chicken, potatoes, the scent of home. Samantha's plate was still on the table, untouched. She had told them at dinner, thinking maybe honesty would keep them from finding out in some harsher way. She had imagined shock, maybe tears, but not this. Not being shoved out into the cold. Her father had told her to pack what she could carry and leave. He didn't care where she went, only that she went. When she hesitated, he pulled her coat from the hook and tossed it to her like she was a guest who had overstayed her welcome. Now the house behind her seemed bigger than ever, glowing in the dark street, the sound of the door finally slamming cutting off any last hope she had of turning back. She stepped off the porch, each movement heavy, not just from the weight of the backpack but from the weight in her chest. Her boots crunched over the thin layer of frost on the driveway. She didn't have a plan. She didn't even know where she was going. Her phone was nearly dead. Her wallet had $23, and the bus stop was 3 blocks away. Halfway down the street, she turned once more. Her mother was at the window, looking out. For a second, Samantha thought she might open the door, call her back. Instead, the curtain slid shut. That was the last time she saw them for years. The last time she heard her father's voice, her mother's silence. They didn't know where she went. They didn't know what happened next. And they had no idea that the one thing she never told them, the truth about the baby's father, would one day shatter their lives completely. The room she found was small and smelled faintly of mildew, with peeling paint on the walls and a thin mattress pushed into the corner. The rent was cheap enough for her to afford, but only if she worked as much as possible. During the day, she cleaned offices. At night, she stocked shelves at a grocery store. Every shift left her feet aching, her back sore, and her hands raw from the cold water in the cleaning buckets. Her belly grew, and so did the stares. The town wasn't big, and people remembered her family's name. Customers at the store would glance at her, lean toward each other, and whisper. Sometimes she'd hear the words "such a shame," or "threw her life away" when she walked by. They didn't know the full story, and she never corrected. It was easier to let them think what they wanted. The hardest moments came late at night, when she climbed into bed after her shift. The walls were so thin she could hear the neighbor's television, but in her room, it was just her and the quiet. She would rest her hand on her stomach and feel the baby kick. That tiny movement was the only thing keeping her from falling apart completely. Ethan was the only person who didn't treat her like she had made some unforgivable mistake. He'd been a friend from high school, the kind who never cared about gossip or appearances. When he learned where she was living, he brought her groceries without asking if she needed them. Sometimes, after his own job ended, he would sit with her in the cramped room, fixing the leaky faucet or patching the loose lock on the door. When the night came for her to give birth, she called him first. He showed up in minutes, helped her into his car, and drove her to the hospital. He stayed through every hour of labor, fetching iced chips, talking to her when the pain made her grit her teeth and shake. Then, in the quiet of the hospital room, she held her daughter for the first time. The baby's tiny fingers curled around her thumb, and her eyes, dark and searching, looked up at her as if she already knew who she belonged to. Samantha named her Lily, the one name she had kept in her heart from the very beginning. Ethan smiled when she told him the name, saying it suited her perfectly. He took a photo of them together, mother and daughter, both exhausted and calm. That moment was the first time in months she felt like she had something of her own, something no one could take away. She didn't think about her parents much in the days that followed. But when she did, the thought was sharp and certain. They had made their choice that night, and she had made hers now. Whatever happened in the future, she would never forgive them. The years passed slowly at first, then seemed to gather speed. Samantha worked steady jobs, moving from one small rental to another, always choosing places far from the town where she grew up. She didn't care if they were plain or cramped as long as they felt safe. She kept her head down, paid her bills on time, and focused on Lily. By the time Lily was in school, Samantha had built a routine. Mornings were spent getting her ready, evenings helping with homework at the kitchen table. Their life was quiet but stable, and that was enough. She never spoke about her family. In her mind, they lived in another world, one she had no interest in crossing into again. She avoided the streets, stores, and people connected to her past. Even when she heard familiar names from customers at the diner where she worked, she stayed silent. If someone mentioned her parents, she pretended she didn't hear. It was easier than explaining anything. One afternoon, when Lily was about 9, they were walking home from the park. She held Samantha's hand and skipped along the sidewalk, chattering about a school project. Then, out of nowhere, she asked, "Why don't we ever go see Grandma and Grandpa?" Samantha stopped mid-step. Her stomach tightened, and she searched for an answer that wouldn't invite more questions. "They live far away," she said finally, forcing a smile. Lily looked up at her. "We could visit in the summer." "We're busy in the summer," Samantha replied quickly, starting to walk again. Her voice was calm, but her pulse was racing. She kept her eyes on the ground until Lily started talking about something else. That night, after Lily went to bed, Samantha sat at the kitchen table staring at her phone. The question still hung in her mind, heavy and unwanted. She told herself it didn't matter. Lily had a home, love, and stability. She didn't need to know anything else. Weeks later, on a slow shift at the diner, she checked her phone during her break. A notification popped up from Facebook. It was a message from an old friend she hadn't spoken to since before she left home. The name alone made her freeze. She opened it, half expecting something casual, maybe a memory from school. Instead, the first line read, "You won't believe what your parents are up to these days." Samantha stared at the words, her thumb hovering over the screen. The rest of the message loaded in, and she felt a mix of dread and curiosity pulling at her. She had gone 10 years without hearing anything real about them. Now, for the first time, someone was offering her a look back into the world she had walked away from, and she wasn't sure she was ready for what she might find. The message from her old friend was longer than she expected. Samantha sat in the corner booth of the diner, scrolling through it while her coffee went cold. Her friend didn't waste time. She wrote that Samantha's parents were planning a huge party for their wedding anniversary, inviting what seemed like half the state. It was going to be held at one of the fanciest hotels in the city. "They're acting like royalty," the message said. "But I heard your dad's company isn't doing well. Big debts. People are talking." Samantha read it twice, letting the words sink in. Trouble with the company? Her father had always treated his business like it was untouchable. The idea that cracks were showing almost didn't seem real. Her friend kept going, saying her parents had been bragging about their perfect family in the weeks leading up to the party. She wrote it in quotes, and Samantha understood why. Perfect family. There was no mention of the daughter they'd thrown out into the cold. In their version of the story, she simply didn't exist. Scrolling further, she saw attachments, pictures taken at a smaller gathering that had happened the week before. Samantha tapped one open. It showed a crowded room, people in suits and dresses, champagne glasses raised. She swiped to the next photo, her eyes scanning the faces without much thought, until she stopped on one. Her breath caught. It was a man standing near the back, talking to a group of guests. He looked older, with a few strands of gray in his hair, but she knew that face. The same sharp jawline, the same dark eyes. It was him, the father of her child. The memories hit fast, each one clearer than she wanted them to be. She remembered the way he used to smile at her when no one was looking, the way he had promised to protect her if things ever went wrong, and the way he had disappeared the moment she needed him most. She stared at the photo, her pulse pounding. What was he doing at her parents' party? Were they still close? Had they kept him in their lives all this time while cutting her out completely? The din of the diner faded away. Her coworker asked if she needed a refill, but Samantha didn't answer. She just kept looking at the picture, zooming in on his face as if the pixels could give her more answers. Her fingers tightened around the phone. After all these years, they were still playing the same game, pretending she was nothing, while keeping their secrets locked away. She exhaled slowly, almost smiling, though there was no humor in it. "They have no idea what's coming," she whispered. The name came back to her before she even wanted to think about it, David. She hadn't said it out loud in years, but it had never fully left her mind. It had started the summer before everything fell apart. Her mother had worked at a law office, and David was one of the senior partners. He was smooth, charming, and always seemed to have a reason to talk to her when she stopped by after school to wait for her mother. At first, she thought it was harmless. He'd ask about her classes, joke about her taste in music, and treat her like she was older than she was. It wasn't long before those casual talks turned into something else. He'd invite her for coffee under the excuse of helping with career advice, or linger too long when they said goodbye. She had been young, unsure, and flattered by the attention. She didn't know then that he had a wife at home. When she finally told him she was pregnant, he didn't deny it was his. He promised he would figure things out. But the next time she tried to call, his number had been blocked. That was when her parents stepped in, not to help her, but to clean up the mess he'd left behind. They had known about David from the start. She realized that later, in bits and pieces, from overheard arguments and the way her mother refused to meet her eyes. They didn't confront him or demand he take responsibility. Instead, they told her that if anyone found out the truth, it would ruin their standing in the community. They said no one could know his name, not his wife, not their friends, not even other family members. And when she refused to lie about who the father was, they made the choice for her. They painted her as reckless, told anyone who asked that she'd been careless and wouldn't say who the father was out of shame. The whispers in town weren't an accident, they'd been planted. The night they told her to leave had been the final act in making her the problem, while David walked away untouched. She had carried the weight alone, raising Lily without a single word from him or a penny of support. Now, staring at the recent photo of him at her parents' party, she felt the old anger sharpen into something new. Time hadn't changed anything. They were still close enough to invite him to their celebrations, still willing to stand beside him, as if none of it had happened. But this time, she had more than anger. She had proof. The messages he'd sent all those years ago were still in her old email account. There were pictures, too, ones he had sent without thinking about what they might mean later. Combined with the fact that he was still in her parents' circle, it was enough to pull apart everything they'd tried so hard to protect. And for the first time in years, she knew she was going to use it. Samantha didn't want to face this alone, so she called Ethan. They hadn't seen each other in a while, but when she told him she needed help, he didn't ask questions, just showed up at her apartment that evening. Over coffee at her small kitchen table, she explained everything. She told him about seeing David at the party, about the truth her parents had buried, and about the evidence she'd kept all these years. Ethan listened without interrupting, his eyes narrowing when she mentioned how her parents had protected David while ruining her. Then we hit them where it hurts, he said simply. They started with public records, property ownership, tax filings, business licenses. Ethan had a knack for finding things people thought were hidden. Soon they were looking at loan documents, debt reports, and corporate filings connected to her father's company. Buried in the details, they found overdue payments, a line of credit close to collapse, and one major loan in default. That's not the kind of thing you recover from quietly, Ethan said, sliding the papers back toward her. They didn't stop there. Samantha suggested looking into David. With a little digging, they found his name in a string of property records tied to apartments in another city. A deeper search uncovered divorce filings, a restraining order request from a former girlfriend, and even an HR complaint from his old job. It was a trail of broken relationships and bad decisions, all documented and all easy to verify. By the end of the week, they had a folder full of material, emails, financial records, photographs, and legal documents. None of it was fabricated. It was all real, and it all painted a picture of the kind of people her parents had chosen to protect. Ethan leaned back in his chair, tapping the folder. You could send this to the press, to his ex-wife, to every board member your father has left. But if you really want to watch them squirm, give it to them in person. In front of everyone they're trying to impress. She looked at him. You mean at the anniversary party? He nodded, a slow smile forming. Wrap it up like a gift. Let them open it with all their friends watching. The thought made her heart race, not from fear, but from the image it put in her mind. Her parents, standing under the chandeliers, pretending to be untouchable, only for their carefully built image to come crashing down in front of their guests. 2 days later, she went to a print shop. She handed over the details for a custom invitation, making sure her name was printed clearly on the front. It wasn't just a ticket to a party. It was the first step toward ending the story they'd been telling about her for years. When she left the shop, the invitation was in her hand. She looked at it for a long time and smiled. The hotel was lit up like it was hosting royalty. Crystal chandeliers glowed through tall windows, and a red carpet stretched from the curb to the front doors. Samantha stepped out of the cab, her black dress catching the light. It was simple but sharp, paired with heels that made her stand taller than she felt. Beside her, Lily smoothed the skirt of her dress, wide-eyed at the sight of the building. Inside, the ballroom was crowded with people in suits and gowns, the air filled with laughter and the clink of glasses. A string quartet played in the corner. Servers in white jackets moved between tables, offering champagne. No one recognized Samantha at first. Heads turned as she walked through the crowd, but the whispers were quiet, curious. Some guests assumed she must be a distant relative or an important friend of the family. The eyes followed her, drawn to the confidence in her steps, the way she didn't hesitate. She spotted them near the center of the room. Her father was speaking to a group of men in tailored suits, his hand resting lightly on a glass of whiskey. Her mother stood beside him, a pale blue gown draped elegantly over her shoulders, a glass of wine in her hand. Samantha didn't stop walking. The sound of her heels on the polished floor seemed loud in her ear. When she reached them, the group fell silent. Her father turned toward her, his polite smile slipping into confusion. Her mother froze completely. The wine glass in her hand shook, the red liquid inside rippling. She looked as if she had seen a ghost. Samantha let the silence hang for a moment. Then she smiled, not warmly, but enough to hold their attention. "Hi, Mom." "Dad," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the small circle of guests who had gathered. Lily stepped forward from behind her, clutching the small clutch bag Samantha had given her to hold. Her mother's gaze shifted to the girl, and her face drained of color. Samantha rested a hand on Lily's shoulder. "I brought your granddaughter." Gasps came from somewhere in the crowd. A woman nearby covered her mouth. One of the men beside her father glanced between them, clearly unsure if he should stay or move away. Her father opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Her mother's grip on the wine glass tightened until Samantha thought it might shatter. She didn't say anything else, not yet. She wanted them to feel every second of the moment, the eyes on them, the questions forming in the minds of their guests, the truth stepping into the light whether they were ready or not. All eyes were still on them when Samantha spoke again, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the noise of the party. "This," she said, giving Lily's shoulder a gentle squeeze, "is Lily. And that," she lifted her hand and pointed toward the far side of the room, where David stood with a drink in his hand mid-conversation, "is her father." David turned at the sound of his name. For a moment he looked confused, then his face went stiff. The chatter in the room died so quickly it was as if someone had turned off the music. Gasps moved through the crowd like a wave. Samantha didn't look away from him. "Some of you already know David. You know him as a business partner, a friend of the family. What you don't know is that he was involved with me when I was 19. What you don't know is that he was married at the time. And what you really don't know, because my parents made sure of it, is that when I told him I was pregnant, he disappeared. And they helped him." Her father shifted uncomfortably, but she went on. "They didn't protect me. They didn't even protect his wife. They protected him. They told me to keep quiet so no one would know the truth. And when I refused, they kicked me out. They told everyone I was careless, that I wouldn't name the father because I was ashamed. But it wasn't shame, it was their lies." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. From it, she drew a stack of printed emails and photographs. She handed them to the man standing closest to her father. "These are messages David sent me during that time. These are photos from his phone. And here," she flipped through the stack and pulled out another paper, "are emails from my parents discussing how to keep my name and his out of the same sentence. You'll see my mother telling him not to worry. You'll see my father making sure no one found out." The man she handed them to scan the first page, his eyebrows lifting in shock. People began to move closer, trying to see. A murmur started, building into something louder. David's wife, who had been standing just a few feet away, took one look at the papers and turned on him. The sound of her hand striking his face cracked through the room, sharp and final. His drink spilled onto the carpet as she stormed away. Samantha glanced back at her father. His skin had gone pale, almost gray, his grip tightening around his glass. He didn't speak, didn't try to deny it. The crowd around them was no longer a party. It was a storm, and she had just pulled the first thread. It didn't take long for the story to travel beyond the hotel walls. By the next morning, the photos of her standing beside Lily were online, along with pieces of the documents she'd handed out. People shared them on social media, tagging her father's company and David's business. The comments came in fast: shock, anger, disbelief. Within days, the first news article appeared. It focused on the affair and the cover-up, but it also mentioned her father's financial troubles. Reporters began calling his office for statements. He didn't give any. Instead, the company's website quietly removed his photo from the leadership page, but by then, the damage was already done. The clients who had once praised him began pulling away. A few canceled contracts outright, others simply stopped returning calls. The timing couldn't have been worse. Those debts Samantha and Ethan had found were already pressing in. Without steady contracts, the cash flow dried up fast. Her parents' social circle changed overnight. The friends they'd entertained for years suddenly had other plans. Invitations stopped coming. People they'd known for decades now crossed the street to avoid speaking to them in public. David's fall was just as quick. His wife filed for divorce within a week of the party. The court filings mentioned infidelity, though not by name. Everyone already knew. His company distanced itself from him almost immediately, ending his role on the board. He disappeared from public view, but the gossip didn't fade. For Samantha, the weeks after the party felt strange. She hadn't spoken to her parents since that night, but the news kept her updated. Every few days there was another blow, an auction notice for one of her father's properties, a leaked email showing desperate attempts to secure new loans, a public record of a lawsuit filed by an old partner. She didn't celebrate. She didn't post anything online. She simply watched from a distance, letting the consequences play out on their own. Ethan checked in on her often, sometimes bringing over takeout so they could sit in her kitchen and go over the latest news. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Samantha sat on the couch with the television off. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen. On the coffee table, her phone lit up with another notification, a new headline about the company's collapse. She picked it up, read it once, and set it back down. There was no rush of joy, no feeling of triumph, just a steady calm, as if a weight she had carried for years had finally been set down. They had built their lives on lies, and now those lies had done the work for her. She leaned back into the couch cushions, closing her eyes for a moment. It wasn't happiness she felt, it was peace. The street looked smaller than she remembered. The trees lining the sidewalk had grown taller, their branches bare in the winter air. Samantha parked a little way down from the house and sat in the car for a moment, taking in the sight. The lawn was patchy, the paint on the porch rail chipped. The for sale sign out front was tilted to one side, a foreclosure notice stapled just beneath it. She walked up the cracked path to the door. Her knock echoed through the quiet house, and for a long time, no one came. Then the door opened a few inches, and her mother appeared. She looked older, much older than the years that had passed. Her hair was thinner, her skin drawn. The confident, polished woman Samantha remembered was gone, replaced by someone who seemed smaller, as if the weight of the past months had pressed down on her. For a second, neither of them spoke. Her mother's eyes moved over her face, searching for something. When her gaze shifted toward the street, Samantha realized she was looking for Lily. "She's not here," Samantha said, her voice steady. Her mother's lips parted, but she didn't speak. "I didn't come for an apology," Samantha went on. "I came to tell you that Lily is doing great. She's smart, she's kind, and she's happy. She's everything you decided you didn't want to be a part of." Her mother flinched at that, but still didn't respond. Somewhere deeper in the house, a floorboard creaked. Samantha knew her father was listening. "I thought for a long time about whether to even bother saying this," she continued. "But I wanted you to know you didn't break me. You didn't break her. We're fine without you." She stepped back from the doorway. Her mother's hand twitched on the edge of the doorframe, as if she wanted to reach out but couldn't bring herself to. Samantha didn't wait for her to try. She turned and walked back down the path, her heels clicking against the uneven concrete. She didn't look back, not even when she reached the car. As she slid into the driver's seat, she glanced once at the house in the mirror. The door was still open a crack, her mother's figure barely visible inside. The wind rattled the loose porch rail. She started the engine and pulled away, the house growing smaller in the rear view until it was gone completely. There was no satisfaction in the visit, no anger left to burn, just a quiet certainty that the chapter was closed. The road ahead stretched out, empty and clear. This time, she wasn't leaving because she was forced out. She was leaving because she chose to.